Hello, and thank you to everyone for joining us today. So, my name is Nikki Griffiths, and I'm the Director of Community Success and Development here at LoveAdmin. I'm really pleased that so many of you have been able to join today. Before joining LoveAdmin, I spent a number of years at British Gymnastics, supporting organisations with funding, sustainability, and club development. So a lot of that work was about helping organisations work through challenges and spot opportunities to build really strong foundations from. One of the things that I've seen again and again is that creating inclusive environments usually isn't about one big dramatic change. It's often about small everyday decisions. So things like how people are welcomed, how barriers are noticed, and opportunities are opened up. So alongside that, this is something that's very personal to me. I have a son called Max who has autism and ADHD. And before gymnastics, he started gymnastics. He hardly spoke, attended a SEND school, and we didn't really know what his path was going to look like. But one day when he was 6, he walked into a gymnastics club and it changed everything for him, but not just for him, but for us as a family, because he'd found a place where he truly belonged and where his differences weren't something to be worked around, but they were actually seen as a strength. And over time, his confidence grew and grew in ways that we never expected. And he went on to compete internationally. And last year actually moved back into a mainstream school. For me, that really brought something home, that the environment didn't change who he was, it changed what was possible for him. And that's why this subject matters so much to me, because the way an organisation feels, the way people are welcomed, and the way differences are understood can completely shape someone's experience and sometimes their whole trajectory in life. And the thing is, those moments don't usually come from one big decision. There are lots of small everyday choices, and that's really what this is about today. So not about equality, diversity and inclusion as something separate from day-to-day practice, but as part of how we create those environments where people feel welcomed, supported and like they belong. Often those small intentional changes make the biggest difference to somebody, and when people feel like they belong, confidence grows, participation grows, and stronger communities grow too. So my hope today is simply to share some practical ideas with you all and hopefully give you a bit of space to reflect on what this could look like in your own organisation. You definitely don't need to have all of the answers. This is about starting where you are and thinking about what small steps might make a difference for you. So with that in mind, we'll get into it. I did say at the beginning, so I don't know if some of you might have missed that if you have any questions as we're going through, if you just pop them into the chat, and there will be a Q&A session at the end. Okay, so most organisations would say that they are inclusive, and to be fair, that's usually true. The intention is there. People care, they want to do the right thing, and they believe that they're creating something that's welcoming. But this is where it gets a bit more interesting. Inclusion isn't just defined by what we believe that we're creating. It's defined by what it actually feels like to be on the receiving end of it. And those two things don't always match up. So someone might walk into your club or into one of your classes, and from your perspective, everything looks right. It's organised, it's friendly, it's working. But for them, they might feel unsure, out of place, or like they don't quite belong here. And the challenge is they won't always tell you. They'll just quietly not come back or not engage in the first place. So the real question isn't, are we inclusive? It's where might someone be experiencing your organisation differently than what you expect? So they're the things that, as we go through here, I want you to really think about. So this is where the gap starts to really show up. On one side, this is what we think that we're creating. So we're welcoming, our process is simple, our pricing is fair, everybody has the same opportunities, right? And all of that can be true from our perspective. But on the other side, this is what it might actually look like for somebody who is experiencing it. So, for example, we might think that we're really welcoming, but someone new walks in, doesn't know anybody, doesn't see anybody, nobody speaks to them, and they're thinking, I don't belong here. Or your process makes perfect sense to you, but for somebody who's never done anything like that before, it might feel confusing or unclear, maybe even a bit overwhelming to some people. Pricing is another massive one that we see, where you might think it's fair, but somebody sitting there thinking, I don't know if I can afford this long term. What happens if I can't keep up? And I do appreciate that that is a point that sometimes we can't help what we have to charge with our own overheads and things like that, but it is something to think about. And representation, if people don't see others that are like them, it can quietly signal to them, this might not be for me. So the important thing here is people will never tell you this. So they don't fill in a form and say, I don't feel like I belong. They just don't join, or they don't come back. So when we talk about inclusion, this is the gap that we're trying to close. So a really simple way to sense check all of this: who currently finds it easier to join what you offer? Is it people who already understand how it works? People who already feel confident walking into that environment anyway? And then who finds it harder? Who might hesitate before joining or drop off early? Who might not even get as far as engaging? This isn't about blaming anything, it's just about noticing those patterns, because if it's always the same type of people that join, the same type of people who engage, and the same type of people who stay, that's not coincidence. It's usually telling you that there's something about how the environment is set up, who it works best for, who it might not be working well for. And that's what the opportunity is for you guys, to really be able to kind of take a step back and have a look at those things through a bit of a different lens that you might not think about really. So this is one of the biggest missed opportunities that I see. So somebody shows interest. Maybe they inquire or they click through your website and you get notified of it. Maybe they even turn up once and then nothing. And what do we usually say? Oh, they just weren't that interested. But what if that's not what actually happened? What if underneath that decision, it was confidence? They weren't sure that they would fit in, or the cost, they weren't sure that they'd be able to commit long term. Access, it didn't quite work for their situation. Or the last one, belonging, they just didn't feel like it was for people like them. And the thing is, we don't see any of that. All we see is the outcome at the end, that they didn't book, or they didn't return, they didn't engage. So we interpret that as a lack of interest, when actually it might have been a barrier that we just didn't realize was there. And that's why inclusion isn't always obvious, because most of it sits beneath the surface. So just to ground this really simply for you guys, when we talk about EDI, we're really talking about three things. So equality, is it fair? Are people being given a fair opportunity to access or take part? Diversity, who's here and who might be missing? Whose perspectives are we seeing? And equally, whose might we not be seeing? And then inclusion. For me, this is the most important one. Do people actually feel like they belong when they get to your club, or when they get to your class, or when they interact with anything that you're sort of posting on socials, or any of the adverts that you're putting out? Do they feel comfortable or confident? Are they able to feel like they can be themselves? Because you can have diversity without having inclusion. People can be present but not feel like they truly belong, or that they can fully take part. So that's the bit that people experience, but more importantly, that's the bit that people will talk about. That's the bit that they will remember, and that's what they'll carry forward to them, and actually might stop them taking part in any activities moving forward. So if we're thinking about where exclusion can show up, a really simple way to frame this is through 5 areas. So the first one is access. How easy is it for somebody to actually take part? And that's not just physical access. So it might be things like session times that only really work for certain families, or a booking process that's simple if you've done it before, but confusing if you haven't, or even not knowing what to expect before you arrive. So someone might be interested, but never quite take that first step. So thinking about what your process is when somebody shows interest, how do you communicate with that person? If somebody signs up to your class, what is your process before they actually get there? Do they know what to expect? Do your staff know what to expect on how to greet people, that sort of thing? Cost, as I said before, it's not just about price, it's about whether something feels manageable and predictable. For example, upfront payments can feel like a big risk if someone isn't sure that they'll stick with it. So having things like trials. There might be extra costs like kit or travel that aren't obvious at the start. And the important thing is here, as I've said before, people will rarely tell you. So they're not going to necessarily come up to you and say, oh, this is way too expensive. They just don't join. So it's just about managing those expectations. Confidence. So this is one of the biggest hidden barriers. It's the moments where somebody feels unsure about stepping forward, not asking a question because they don't want to look silly, or not joining in fully because they're not sure that they'll fit in, or attending once and then quietly not coming back. Those moments are really easy for you to miss if you're not actually looking for them. So again, thinking about the kind of processes that you have in place for those follow-ups and the communications with parents, those sorts of things. Culture. What kind of culture do you have? This is like the unspoken side of your organization. So what feels normal to some might feel unfamiliar or uncomfortable to others. So it could be things like inside jokes or language that only the regulars understand. Making sure that if you are, for instance, a gymnastics club, and you have parents that are sort of sat in the reception area, and it's a bit cliquey, it's you really want to stamp those things out and make sure that kind of behavior is not here. Like, everybody is welcome. Just that feeling of somebody walking in and thinking, oh, everybody already knows each other and nobody's going to speak to me. Culture isn't what we say, it's about the way that people feel when they walk into that environment. So really, if you do have lots of regular parents that might sit outside, make sure that you're including them in these things as well, and in welcoming new people and making sure, we really want to make everyone feel welcome. So Susie's mum's joining today, can you make sure that you say hello to her so she's not sat on her own, that sort of thing. Representation. Who do people see and who do they hear from? Because if someone looks at your website or your sessions or your team and they don't see people like them, that can quietly signal that this might not be for me. So thinking about things like, do you cover all cultures in your social media? Are you making sure that each demographic is represented? Making sure that everything is accessible for everybody. The key thing is that these things don't sit in isolation. Somebody's experience is shaped by more than one of these things at once. So it's not about turning this part into a checklist or just trying to fix everything at once. It's about starting to just take notice of these things, because most barriers, they don't get raised. They just quietly stop people taking the next step. And that's why this matters, because EDI is often less about asking, do we have the right intention? And more about asking, how is this actually being experienced by somebody else? So once we start spotting where the barriers might sit, the natural next question is, well, what do we actually do about it? And the good news is that that doesn't require big, complex changes. It often starts with small, practical shifts in everyday behaviour. I tend to think about it in three simple areas because they're the easiest things for you to work on day to day. So the first one is making it easier to join. This is about reducing friction at that first point of contact. So things like, is the information clear if you're completely new? Is the process easy to follow or only easy if you already understand it? Do people know what to expect before they arrive? Because if joining feels unclear or overwhelming, then that's often where people drop off. And the best way to kind of sense check this with yourselves is get somebody to actually test that for you. This is what I would send somebody if when they start one of our classes, and just say, you know, I really want some feedback on this from you, and get somebody else to actually have a look at it for you. Then making it easier to belong. This is what happens when someone's actually through the door. So how are they welcomed? Do they feel noticed, or do they feel like they're just blending in? How easy is it for them to feel a part of things? Because people might join, but if they don't feel like they belong, then they're less likely to stay. So as I said, making sure that you're creating that environment, not just within your staff, but you know, within some of your parents, if you have an area where they're going to be sat, if you have a receptionist, having things in place that within your staff that everybody knows there's going to be a new starter. They know what their name is. So if that coach or teacher and that child is coming to their class, make sure that they greet them by their name, because the difference that will make to somebody, and asking them, you know, is there anything in particular you need? You know, asking those parents, is there anything that I need to know about Sally? You know, any of those sorts of things really will make a huge difference when you don't even realize. And making it easier to stay involved. So because EDI isn't just about access, it's about confidence and retention, progression over time. So thinking about things, you know, do people feel comfortable continuing? Do they feel listened to? And can they see a place for themselves longer term? When I say about do they feel listened to, if somebody raised a concern with you, how is that dealt with? Is it met with, you know, yeah, I'll deal with that, and then they never have any feedback on it? Is it just, you know, do you get defensive, or do your coaches get defensive, or do they actually feel like they've been listened to? That doesn't mean that you have to sort of bend over backwards if there's, you know, if it's not an issue that you agree on, but actually somebody just feeling like they've been listened to goes a really long way. And what I like about this way of thinking is that it makes EDI feel less overwhelming. It's not about fixing everything at once. As I said, it's about asking, how can we make it easier to join, easier to belong, and easier to stay? Because that's what people actually experience. And I know that you keep hearing me say the word experience, and that's very intentional, because how people experience you and your organization is what will determine whether or not they stay or go or talk kindly about you to other people. So another really useful way to think about inclusive practice is to just kind of zoom out slightly. Inclusion isn't usually about one thing to fix. As I said, it's shaped by lots of different parts of an organization coming together. A simple way to look at that is just through these 4 areas that I call the 4 Ps. So people, programs, places, and partnerships. These 4 areas help us move away from thinking, what one thing can we change? And instead think, where does inclusion show up in what we do every single day? So first, people. Who is involved, who is heard, and who might be missing? Because it's not just about who is there, it's about whose voices are actually part of that experience. So, do you have feedback sessions with parents? Is there a way for you to receive feedback, like a communication app or something similar there, that people can actually give you feedback and see that you're actually taking action on those things? Are you having, annual meetings with parents, that sort of thing? Programs. So how are opportunities designed? Do they feel fair and accessible, or are they just easier for some people to navigate than others? So as I said, like looking at timetables and things like that. Places. What does it feel like to be in your environment? Do people feel comfortable, welcomed, or do they feel slightly unsure when they come into your wherever your activity is taking place? And then partnerships. So who else could help you reach out to people that you're not currently reaching? Because sometimes the barrier isn't the offer, it's who knows about it or who feels connected to it. And what this does is shift EDI from being one policy or one initiative and into something that shows up across everything that you do. Because again, people don't experience one part of your organization, they experience all of it. And to slightly build on this, what we're talking about here are these three questions. So is it fair? Who might be missing? And who might experience this differently? So this is actually the thinking behind something called an equality impact assessment, or an EIA. I don't know if any of you have heard about these before, but at its core, this is just a structured way of asking these questions before you make a decision. But this is where it becomes really powerful. So who you involve in that thinking is really, really pivotal, because an EIA is not something that you should complete on your own. If you do that, you're still designing based on your own perspective, not other people's. The real value comes from involving people who actually may experience those barriers. So it might be somebody who has a disability, somebody who comes from an underrepresented group, or somebody whose experience of your organization might be different to the majority, because they will see things that you simply can't see yourself. So, for example, you might think the sign-up process is completely straightforward, but for somebody with a visual impairment or somebody less confident with computers might find it really confusing or inaccessible. So another example would be you might think that you're really your sessions feel really, really welcoming, but somebody who doesn't see anybody like them in that space may experience it completely differently. And that's why this matters so much, because most exclusion isn't intentional. It happens because decisions are made without those perspectives in the room. So an EIA isn't just about completing some paperwork and ticking a few boxes. It's about pausing and very deliberately bringing in perspectives that you might not naturally have, because inclusion improves the moment those different experiences are part of the decision, not after. You can't design experiences that you've never had. So you have to include the people who have had those experiences or may experience those barriers. So it's also worth saying that this doesn't require perfection. So a lot of people think, I have to get this perfect, I have to get this completely right. And I think it's really important to really say that this doesn't require perfection from anybody, because for a lot of organizations, that's where people can feel unsure and think, oh, what if we get it wrong? What if we don't do enough? Or often actually, where do we even start? This isn't about having the perfect answers. It's about being aware enough to notice where experiences might be different, and intentional enough, I guess, to do something about that as well. Because most organizations, as I said, they're not excluding people on purpose. They're making sure, but it doesn't mean that people aren't being excluded. And once you start to see that, you can start to shift. So really it comes down to three things. So three things for you to remember is awareness. So being able to spot what might not feel the same for everybody. The next one is intention, which is just really about making conscious choices rather than just relying on how things have always been done. And then the willingness to just keep improving, because where there's will, where there's will, there's a way, because there will always be more to notice, more to learn, and more to strengthen. And the more you do this, the more things you will notice and the more things you will strengthen. So the goal isn't to get everything right. It's just to stay open and stay curious and keep taking those small practical steps forward, because that is what will gradually change how people experience your organisation. So we'll kind of build it to this is, what will you do next? Not everything, just one thing, one small thing that could make somebody's experience better. So maybe that would be making something clearer. Maybe it's changing how you welcome people. And maybe it's questioning a process that you've never really thought about. It doesn't have to be big, but it does have to be intentional. Because inclusion isn't defined by what we say, it's defined by what people actually experience. And that experience is shaped by the decisions that we make every day, even the small ones. So that's my presentation completed. And I want to just make sure that we've got enough time for Q&A. So if you take one thing away from this before we move on, let it be this, that inclusion isn't about what we intend, it's about what people experience. And that's something that we can all experience every single day. So just really try and keep that in your mind. So I'm happy to take some questions now, but I do believe to get us started, Joe, we had 3 questions that were sent in, I think. So I'll answer those first, and hopefully they are one of your questions from somebody who is already in the webinar.
Sure, yeah. So I've got some here that we've received before. So I'll just go to the first one, which was what's the first step clubs can take to assess whether anyone is being excluded, whether that's, but hopefully unintentionally. So yeah, what's the first step they can take?
The first step is really simple. Look at your experience, not your intention. So instead of asking, are we inclusive? Ask who is actually joining, staying and progressing and who isn't. So a really practical way to do that is look at the 3 points that I said before. So who joins, who drops out, who stays and who progresses. So you might notice things like lots of people inquire, but fewer complete the booking, or certain age groups or types of participants don't stay as long. So that's not something to fix straight away. It's a signal to kind of explore. And a good way to do that is to make sure that your communication is really on. So are your opening messages too open for interpretation? Are they you making sure that they're ready for people to take actions? Are you getting the same repeat questions about things? Like, is there something you're not covering? Because that can be a sign that something isn't landing as clearly as we think. So the first big step isn't a massive audit, it's just being curious about the experience that other people are having and seeing if they're noticing those patterns, as I said.
Thank you. Yeah, that I think that's a really good point of, like, you're probably already receiving some of this feedback and it's kind of being able to assess it all in the same place.
Yeah.
Another one that came in was if a club isn't sure how to adapt their sessions for different needs or confidence levels, what's the best way to approach this?
So the important thing is you don't need to have all the answers up front. The best approach is to build flexibility into how your sessions are actually delivered. So rather than trying to design like one perfect session for everybody, really. So instead of one fixed way of doing something, you might offer like different levels, different starting points, or just give people the option to go at their own pace. And a big part of that is also confidence. So some people aren't struggling with ability necessarily, they're just unsure or new. So small things make a big difference, explaining like what's going on, what's going to happen, checking in, reassuring people that it's okay to take their time. And honestly, one of the most powerful things that you can do is just ask, like, what would make this easier for you? Like, as I said, you don't need to have perfect adaptations. You just need to create an environment where people feel able to take part in a way that actually works for them. I hope that answers
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, great, thank you. I think yeah, there can be it can feel like a lot of pressure to go, I need to make sure that I'm providing something that's for
Mhm.
everybody. But if
Yeah.
if maybe you haven't met them before, you don't really know what those needs are, but it's actually take
Yeah.
that step, that pressure off and just ask people.
Yeah.
Yeah, make that a kind of a welcoming space to be able to do that. Okay, and the last one was the experience of the different like staff members or coaches can vary quite a bit, and obviously that might change from session to session. So, how do clubs keep that consistent across the whole team?
And this is a really common question, actually, and it usually comes down to making inclusion part of their everyday behaviour, not like more of an individual style, because if it's left to individuals, then you'll always get variation. So the key is to create a few shared expectations across the team. So not necessarily lots of rules, but just a few consistent behaviors that everybody understands. So as I said before, how do we welcome somebody new? How do we explain new activities, or how do we check in with someone who we know is struggling? If everybody does those things consistently and knows what is expected of them from the beginning, then the experience becomes much more stable. So I think that, and again, a big part of that is communication, making sure that if parents are getting different messages depending on the coach, or updates vary from session to session, then that can create a really inconsistent experience for people. So having a consistent way that you communicate, where expectations, tone, and updates are all aligned, can make a massive difference on how inclusive and professional things feel. Because actually, people, as I said, they experience your organization as a whole, and that is also in each and every coach and teacher and receptionist that you have. So making sure that you really tie those behaviors into every touch point that anyone has with you is a huge thing.
Thanks. Great. Well, those are the questions that came in before the session. But does anybody else have anything else they'd like to ask, or their own kind of issues that have come up or experiences they've had that they'd like to share?
I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. Actually, I've realised that I can't see anyone, so I'm just talking to the last side.
So we haven't had anything come in through the chat, but if
You can
anyone,
unmute yourselves if you'd like to ask the question. You don't have to type it in, so it's easier. But if there are no questions, then it means that I've done a really good job and covered everything that you wanted to ask. So, yay me.
Hi, Nikki. It's Anita here. I had a question. Yes, thank you
Yeah.
very much for all the information you've given. So if we don't have that inclusion already,
Mhm.
looking at some different examples that you've given, um, and I was thinking specifically about websites and social media and things, pictures that we put up. How do we put across that that we're welcome to different people of different backgrounds, different ethnicities. I live in a fairly small village,
Mhm.
so the diversity is not as great. So how do we sort of attract people that we might not already have?
So there can be different things. There can be things that are. So did you say you don't have a website or social media?
No, I do
Or
have
you do?
social.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So celebrating, what activity is it that you do, Anita?
So children's activities like arts and crafts.
Okay, perfect. So a really easy way for you to do that would be to celebrate different key points of the year. So things like Diwali, for instance, you know, putting together some arts and crafts in your sort of program that are around key things like that, and then you can use those. So even if you don't have children that are from different cultures that attend currently, you can make sure that you do that. Celebrate different things like neurodiversity week. It's gone now, that was in March, but you know, those sorts of things that you can absolutely do, and then share them on your social media, and make sure that you're sharing those things with parents. You know, if you're doing a newsletter, for instance, even if it's a quarter, you know, it's this quarter we're going to be looking at these things in our curriculum, or whatever the activities are that you have planned. Also, you know, there's different things like different iStock images and stuff that you can use, which are, you could use images of people from varying backgrounds in your social media if you get them from somewhere like iStock, because you're allowed to use those images. So it's just kind of getting those different points out there so that people can actually see those people like them, and then they might join.
Okay, yeah, that's useful. Thank you.
No worries. Any other questions? Can't believe you're not asking me a question, Janine.
Yeah, that is a good point, that I am being very quiet, Nikki. I am not asking you a question because based on advice you've already given me, you will have seen I've done a new what's it called? The inclusion statement, and considered lots of areas. I found it really, really useful, some of the information you've given me, and I feel very much happier with my position in terms of financial assistance and special educational needs and all of that kind of thing. I've taken a couple of notes from things today that to make sure that all areas of the community are represented in my images on my website, which I don't think I maybe had done as well as I could have done. But apart from that, I'm feeling a bit like you said, taking a step at a time, not kind of throwing everything out, but you know, gradually moving the culture further towards ensuring that everybody's included. I mean, I think one of the things that I do find difficult is including those with quite severe special educational needs into our classes, because they do require a one-to-one, and that does require some extra funding. So in some cases, and also it does have an impact on the rest of the class and the rest of and the coaches. But we are trying to bring those children in for one-to-ones or during the day, or trying to get them out of schools when the school isn't such a natural setting for them, and getting somebody to bring them to us in the day, and doing smaller sessions. So yeah, where we can. And we also run a son and sibling session on a Sunday where they come in with the parents. So that's been quite successful as well.
Yeah, I knew that you'd start to do some of those things, and I think that it's really good that you do that. And I think it's worth kind of noting as well to others that the funding is there for kind of support with some of these things. If you know kind of where to sort of look for it, or you know, we can sort of look at things like, or what is our contacts like with the council, for instance. Every council has a pot of money that is specific for children that have learning difficulties or profound physical needs, or just for the social cultures, really, to get providers like yourselves to be more inclusive. So knowing kind of who to approach in your council to kind of help with that funding. So if you have a situation where you have somebody who's got either, you know, quite profound learning impairments, or even sort of any physical sort of impairments, that I understand how that can be a barrier from a staffing point and things like that. But looking at it from a different perspective of, okay, well, how can we want to do this? We really want to help in our community and provide a service for the children like that, for young adults like that have those, limited access to things like that sometimes. But councils have a legal responsibility to, and they all have a pot of money for that. So it's just, bothering them is what I say. You just bother them and keep talking to someone until you get to the right person. Or look at the local plan. Each council has a local plan. And in there, if you search for your council's local plan, there will be a section about maintaining sports or activities, and then there will also be a section around equality, diversity and inclusion and what their commitment to their borough is, so you can use that against them.
Okay, I will do that, thank you. Most definitely.
Okay, if we don't have any more questions, if nobody else wants to ask any questions, I really hope that you have all found this useful. If you have any sort of follow-up questions or anything like that, you're going to receive an email, I believe, Jo, which will have some information on, and I will make sure that my email is put on there. So if you have any questions, you can email me, and you will have access to an equality impact assessment. I'll provide a template for that with some direction on sort of how to fill it out. So hopefully you will find that useful. So I'll hand back over to Jo to close the session.
Thanks, Nikki. That was a really great session. Thank you. Lots of information there. Hopefully everyone else found it very informative too. And thank you for everybody for being here, for attending. It's really great to see some faces and to have you here. As Nikki said, you'll receive an email in the next day or so with some resources, link to the Thrive Hub course and some more information. So please look out for that, and yeah, let us know if you have any further questions after today. With that, I think we're all done. So thank you so much, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Have a good rest of your day.